Imagine you've reached retirement with $1 million saved. Sounds great, right? But then someone asks a surprisingly difficult question. Well, how much can you safely spend? Is it 40,000 per year? Maybe 50? How about 70? And where should I pull from? Is it your IRA first or maybe your Roth account, your brokerage account? And does it even really matter? Well, the answer is yes, it matters a lot. And today we're going to explore why retirement income planning is about far more than a simple percentage or a rule of thumb. We'll discuss how withdrawal strategies, taxes, investment accounts, and future goals all work together to help determine not only how much income you can generate, but how long your money will last. Welcome to Paladin Financial Talk, and welcome featured advisor Jack Ekholm from the Paladin Financial team. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Nikki. I'm happy to be here.
All right, Jack, I have to brag on you. You are a fantastic piece of our team. So a little bit about your background, and everybody can look you up on our website at paladinfinancial.com. But you're a graduate of Drake University with degrees in finance and actuarial science. Sounds difficult, but you did not decide to be an actuary. Instead, we got you and have had the pleasure of working with you for the last couple of years. But you did internships at Travelers, Allianz Life, Principal Financial, and Deloitte Consulting. You started with us as a paraplanner. You came to us with your designation on the paraplanner side,
That's
and
right.
you have continued to get your licensure along the way. So you now have your Series 7 and 66.
Yep.
You're working towards, you have your life and health licenses,
That's
and you're
right.
working towards your CFP right now. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Gearing up for the exam next month. So
Okay, well,
it's been a lot of work, but it's been good learning.
you are going to be fantastic. If anybody can take a test, if you look down your list here and your credentials and how much you've accomplished in the last couple of years, it's really easy to brag on you.
Thank you.
So you and Jeff work as a team. So started out using those designations that you have as a paraplanner, and you have really come into your own on being a partner with Jeff and a financial advisor, working with our clients. And so you've done such a fantastic job, and I love to hear when people are bragging about you. Is there
Thank
anything
you.
else you want to add to your background or anything that would be worthwhile?
Not much to add. I'm similar to Jeff Foley for those that are familiar with him.
Yeah.
I think we share a lot in common in terms of being a little bit more on the analytical and nerdy side. So I love digging into topics like what we're discussing today. So
I love it. And you come well prepared. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're going. So with our podcast, each month or every kind of 4 weeks to 5 weeks, we change the topic. And the series that we're on right now is really about investment, like the investment strategies and then withdrawal strategies. And so as you're building wealth and creating retirement income, those two things are not the same thing, and they each require a strategy. And so our team over the next 4 weeks here, we're providing the key concepts that guide as it relates to investment and retirement planning. So terminology that feels a little stuffy, but accumulation, but there's a strategy that goes behind that investment strategy. And then when it comes to the withdrawal side, we'll talk about that. And that's really where you're going to shine some light on things today, is what are some of the things that are out there as kind of templates or strategies. And then we'll get into a fully separate episode on what we do at Paladin Financial. So you're going to give us big picture today, if that sounds good. And so while I try to make this, some of these concepts simple, they in fact can be somewhat complex, but it comes back to what decisions are made and why those matter. And again, we're gonna master this over the next 4 weeks as we go through investment strategies, withdrawal strategies, and then what we do here at Paladin Financial. So let's get into this, if that sounds good.
Let's do it.
All right. So last week, Jeff Foley kicked us off with the foundation of investment strategy, and we discussed kind of the simple start is having a goal. And I went into how the concept of SMART goals that can actually eliminate some of the things on your list. And SMART is a technical term that you might find in the corporate side, but you have to be specific and measurable, make sure they're realistic, make sure there's a timeline. And sometimes things come off the list when you actually get specific. But the point is, starting with a goal is a key piece of this. And then the concept of net worth and cash flow are really simple terms, but they actually bring things to life and they help
Mhm.
us understand kind of what we're aiming for. But what we'll find, there's a lot more to things, like there's risks that we have to be aware of. We barely touched on taxes last week, but that is a really big piece that I think that you're going to mention a few times as we move through today.
Yep.
Diversification, asset allocation, and some of the mistakes that people make along the way when they think, oh, it's not that hard when you're in the accumulation phase. And so what we'll do today is we're going to shift into this concept of withdrawal strategies and the decisions that determine how retirement assets get converted into income. So basically,
Mhm.
what we're talking about is you spent all these years building up your assets, and now I tell
Yep.
you I want to retire. How do I make that all work for me? And so that's what
Yep.
we'll go through today.
Yeah.
I want to bring up a client. So you and I were just chatting for a moment before we turned on the microphones here, and neither of us could remember exactly what the statistic was, but it's something along the lines of 60%, if not more, retire earlier than they actually planned on. And when you're
Mhm.
building out a plan and you're talking about where is all this money going to come from? Well, yeah, you've worked really hard to create a bucket of money. And then Social Security plays into that, but then
Mhm.
some people are like, "Well, I'm never gonna retire or I'm gonna work part-time. I could never sit still."
Yep.
But reality is life happens and people end up choosing to completely retire well before they thought that they might. And so as life happens, you're gonna find that that theme weaves all the way through what we're gonna talk about today.
Absolutely.
And so even though you're gonna give us some rule of thumbs, there's a lot more that goes into
Yep.
it, and we gotta
Yep.
be able to pivot fairly quickly as we need things and wanna do things. And so,
Mhm.
Jack, I'm really excited, to go through this today. And so I really think it starts with, I've worked really hard. I know that I have Social Security coming. I know that I've built up this bucket of money, but how much can I take, and where do I go from there? What am I missing? So let's just start with the
Yep.
simple question of how much can I take out?
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point that having a goal in mind could be a good structure to start to prepare for this and retirement coming up for anybody that's still in their working years. Ideally, you'd have an idea of here's what I want my retirement income to be. And I'm intentionally building up my retirement assets to provide for that income throughout my retirement. Now, a lot of people, that's part of their plan. Other people, like you mentioned, they're just tired of working, they want to
Mm.
retire, and they wanna see if I retire now, how much can I take out? What can my portfolio sustainably provide for me? And it's a tough question to answer. Of course, there's 2 competing priorities here. One, you don't wanna overspend, that's probably the
Mm.
bigger priority for most people. They just don't wanna run out of money because they don't wanna go back to work.
Yeah.
And then the second is they don't want to underspend. Of course, it would be easier and you could retire a lot sooner with a lot less money if you were spending next to nothing in retirement, but is that really the retirement lifestyle that you want? So, there's lots of rules of thumb out there for how you could potentially determine how much income can my portfolio provide for me. And so I'll go through a couple of those here, and it's not going to be a comprehensive list, but it's some of the more common methods that I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen out there on the internet or seen in their readings.
Before you do that, I'm such a visual person that I have to come back to, I kinda started to say this. So, we have a client that came to us less than a year ago, and when you originally met with him, the goal was he had taken a break from working, a series of life events had happened, and then he was making the decision if he was gonna go back to work, whether full-time, part-time, and then I, was introduced to him as well, and by the time we got done with the initial couple conversations, we decided, "Let's not go back to work." That was the final decision. Can we make this work?
Yep.
And so, we'll start there. I'm gonna say, for anybody that's a visual person, which is a large percentage of people, imagine that's you, is that you come
Mhm.
in and you're having that initial conversation of, I think it's time for me to be done. Or you might be thinking, okay, maybe some part-time work. But when you get to the end of it, it's no, I don't want to go back to work. So Jack, start with that of,
Yep.
okay, how do you go about deciding what advice you can give me?
Yep. Yeah. So a few different, I guess, styles of retirement withdrawals in terms of taking money out of your portfolio and deciding how much that can be. The most basic one is the kind of RMD style. So if you're familiar with required minimum distributions, which apply to like pre-tax accounts like 401ks and IRAs when you eventually hit a certain age. For most people right now, it's 73 or 75. But once those eventually start, the way they're calculated is you take your account balance, divide it by your life expectancy based on what the IRS predicts based on your age, and that's the amount you have to take out in that year. So theoretically, if I do that with my investment portfolio, let's say I'm in this gentleman's situation, I'm entering retirement, and let's say I expect to live for 25 years. And this first year, I'll take out 1/25th of my portfolio. And then next year, when it's 24, I'll take out 1/24th. So each year you're taking out only a portion of your portfolio, which kind of guarantees it's never going to run out. But the problem here is your income is going to be a lot lower earlier in retirement when you're dividing by a much bigger number
Yeah.
versus later in retirement when your life expectancy is, let's say it's 10 years. Now I'm taking out a tenth of my portfolio each year. And so that's not really going to match for most people the way that spending in retirement generally goes, which generally it's higher earlier in retirement when you want to be more ambitious, you're feeling like you want to travel more, do more things before things eventually settle down. And then later in retirement, potentially health expenses, long-term
Yeah.
care expenses, and that kind of forms the retirement smile
Yep.
that you'll hear about often.
I love the retirement smile. I also love the go-go years, the no-go years.
Yep.
I think those are fun to kind of remind people of what that does look like and what your spending looks like in
Yep.
retirement.
Yep. So that's the RMD style. Not going to be the greatest option for a lot of people, but it is one way to kind of guarantee that your portfolio isn't going to run out of money later. Now, another option is the fixed dollar method. So basically, in your first year, you pick a percentage of your portfolio. Generally, people pick between 3 to 5%. And we'll talk later about where that range in terms of a percentage generally comes from. Let's say it's 5% of your portfolio that you take out in your first year. And let's say my portfolio is $1 million. Like you mentioned, 5%, I'm getting $50,000 a year. I'm going to keep taking that 50,000 each year for 5 years. And at the end of those 5 years, if my portfolio has gone up, I'm taking out more money now because I'm applying that 5% again to the new portfolio balance. If it's gone down, I get a cut in income because now it's 5% of a lower balance. So you're kind of doing that each year, every 5 years, and then readjusting and so on. So similar issue here in that, for one, you're not getting any sort of inflation adjustment. So that same 50,000 that I'm taking out this year, come 4 years later, is not going to be as powerful in terms of purchasing power for getting me as far in terms of purchasing things
Yeah.
just for lifestyle in retirement. And then also, it's not accounting for most people in retirement, their spending not just being a fixed dollar amount each year and that continuing each year. Like we talked about, there's the go-go, there's the slow-go years. There's also one-off purchases.
Yeah.
People want to buy property or they want to fund education for a grandkid. They want to travel, for example, and not all of that is planned
Yeah.
at the beginning of retirement. So a problem that we'll see with a lot of these methods is accounting for that and kind of those one-off expenses, but rather projecting that it's going to be linear. And for most people, it's not.
Yeah. Oh, you go back to the client that I was talking about at the beginning. It was a scenario where less than a year ago we met with him, decided we're going to retire, and then things come up that are important to him at this phase of life. And so whether it's a new motorcycle or a new roof, it doesn't matter who the person is. There's going to be things that pop up, and you don't want to be in a position where you're telling yourself, no, you can't do that because you're following some model. It's just not how the world works.
Yep.
And so accounting for that, you can say, oh, that won't be me, or, oh, I'm a disciplined person, I can follow it. But the reality is either it's unexpected or you want to live a little and enjoy things. And there's a dollar, a
Yep.
price tag that goes along with that. Yeah. Keep going, Jack. This is fantastic.
Yep. And one of the more common, probably the most common that people hear out there is the 4% rule. So as they hear it probably from other people, they hear I can spend 4% of my portfolio each year and I won't run out of money. And then along with the 4% rule, people may not realize, but part of that is you do get an inflation adjustment each year. So you'd start at 4% of your portfolio in the first year. Let's say inflation is 2.5% year over year. Going into the next year, you get a 2.5% raise on the withdrawals you're taking out of your portfolio. So what most people may not realize is when this was first published, which was back in 1994 by a researcher by the name of Bill Bengen in the Journal of Financial Planning, it was more of an academic exercise. It wasn't necessarily a recommendation from an advisor. And the research behind that was for a retirement portfolio composed of half stocks and half bonds, so half more aggressive investments and half safer investments. What percent can we take out, and modeled in thousands of different scenarios with different return assumptions and inflation assumptions? What is the most we can take out where there is zero probability of the portfolio running out of money over the course of a 30-year retirement? And what they settled on was 4%. That's what they found. But what most people may not realize, that's a very conservative number going into retirement. Looking at of those thousands of cases that they modeled in the research behind the 4% rule, on average, it resulted in the retiree finishing with nearly triple their original balance when they started retirement, and they were equally likely to finish with less than their initial portfolio as they were to finish with more than 6 times their initial portfolio. So not only is the 4% rule very inflexible and rigid, as we talked about, it's just going to be that 4% increasing each year for inflation, but it's also very conservative. And for a lot of people, it forces unnecessary frugality. And I think where that comes from and why people like the 4% rule is they want to minimize probability of failure. They just want to know, I'm not going to run out of money in retirement, and feel confident with that. What is better for a lot of people, though, is to think of it instead as considering and being prepared for a probability of adjustment. So if people are familiar with Monte Carlo models, that's kind of the model that I was referring to there. Putting your portfolio and your income withdrawals from your portfolio to the test in thousands of different scenarios, a lot of people want to target 100% probability that I'm going to have success in retirement. Basically, if I continue what I'm doing now, or based on the projection that I've entered, I'm going to be okay in these thousands of different scenarios. But what that doesn't account for is adjustments that you'd realistically make if things aren't going according to plan. So if your portfolio balance isn't going up each year by the percentage that you've projected, or there's an extended period of a market drawdown, in reality, you'd probably be okay with sacrificing some of your income or reducing some of your expenses, at least for a small portion of time, to make it possible throughout retirement to generally withdraw more than that safer 4%. So one approach to address that is the guardrail approach. So it's a method that factors in those adjustments over time. So instead of the 4% each year forever, you can start with a higher percentage of your portfolio. Let's say it's 5%, and then you have guardrails above and below. So if I start at 5% of my portfolio income and I keep taking that same amount of income, if that 5% eventually becomes 6% or higher because my portfolio balance has gone down, at that point, I readjust to 5% of the new balance. So I'm taking a bit of a pay cut, acknowledging my portfolio balance isn't necessarily tracking to the plan I initially had in place. On the contrary, though, if your portfolio balance goes up above projections, and now that 5% is 4% or less, then I get a pay raise. So if the market's doing well, I get a pay raise. If the market's not doing well, my portfolio balance is down, I have to take a bit of a pay cut. But for most people, they're okay with doing that because, again, they can start with a higher balance at the beginning and kind of maintain that throughout retirement with small adjustments.
Jack, what I heard you say is all amazing things. It says, I want somebody to do this for me. It's complicated.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts that go along with this. And while you haven't explicitly said it, think about the impact that these are rule of thumbs, but the world is happening around us. And so there's that as a moving part. Taxes, legislation, other things go into this as well. And so you put these rule of thumbs, seems simple enough to comprehend until you apply the real world. And so variables of, legislative changes could potentially impact taxes. The world is happening around us, which could impact inflation, interest rates. You want a new motorcycle, like boom, 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 boom. That list is a lot. And so the one thing that I did hear you say, and it's refreshing, is, whether you use the technical term of Monte Carlo or the concept of, as you walk away from that, is there's multiple scenarios that need to take place to give
Mhm.
people peace of mind, financial peace of mind, that we're, it's not as rigid as some of this suggests.
Yep. Yeah. So these rules of thumb that I mentioned, they're really just a starting point. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, it doesn't really match how retirees spend. It tends to be lumpier, not just that linear whatever percentage each year. They want things like a motorcycle
Yeah.
one-off, and they're not necessarily expecting that to happen. So if you're just taking your 4% rule, for example, how do you account for that if something comes up that's beyond the amount you're taking out each year? In addition to that, your income needs vary throughout retirement. We talked about the retirement smile. In addition, what a lot of people don't consider is that withdrawals from your retirement portfolio are not always the same portion of your income, the same percentage of your income each year throughout retirement. So, what happens for a lot of people, if you think of all of your income throughout retirement as like a big block,
Mhm.
and each sliver going from left to right is each year's income in retirement. If we look at the left-hand side earlier in retirement, generally withdrawals from your portfolio are going to be a higher percentage of your income. You're waiting to start Social Security until later. Let's say we're
Yeah.
doing Roth conversions, for example. We're trying to keep your taxable income low. So we're letting that build. We're letting your pensions build. In those early years, a big percentage of your income need is met by your retirement portfolio. But eventually, for a lot of people, especially if they have high fixed income sources like a pension and then
Mhm.
eventually Social Security kicks in, for some people, eventually, once those start, withdrawals from the portfolio are next to none of their actual income need. So, how do we account for that if I'm taking heavy withdrawals earlier and they have to be in excess of the 4
Mhm.
or 5%? But later on, I'm not going to need any amount from my portfolio. That also needs to be modeled in as well. And then you mentioned taxes. The amount that's calculated with a rule of thumb like the 4% rule, for example, that 4%, that's pre-tax income. So if I'm taking that from an IRA or a 401k or another account that's going to be taxed to me when I take that withdrawal, the amount that actually ends up landing in my pocket is going to be potentially significantly different
Mhm.
depending on my other income sources in that year and the actual net amount I get to keep after taxes. So what all of these, I guess, nuances require is a more customized approach for each person. And
Yeah.
that's really what we do for our clients. And, the important role for an advisor to a client that's entering and navigating retirement is modeling in your whole picture
Mhm.
and seeing based on this trajectory on your plans, are you in good shape? Because sure, that 4% rule is a good starting point, but like we talked about, there's additional considerations there.
Jack,
So,
I have to stop you for a second.
yeah.
I'm all the way back when you were talking about cutting it into blocks.
Yep.
All I could think about was cake when you were telling me that, but, like, retirement cake is kind of a fun thing to talk about, so
Yep.
you don't even have to reply to that. I just need to know you to know that your image made me think of cake.
Yep.
So, I love the retirement cake that we're going through here because it makes me excited about food, but you keep going here, and all kidding aside on that, these are complicated decisions, and the reality is you have to be really on top of your game if you think you're gonna do this on your own, because
Mhm.
think about the moving parts that you have to make a decision today or tomorrow on something, and you need to know what's the status today of everything, including, I know you're gonna get into this because this is kind of the next phase or some of the questions that you have to ask yourself, but of what's my current tax scenario? What's my current Social Security scenario? If I do something, how does it impact my Medicare? And so I know this is all part of it, but
Mhm.
it's really big decisions. And the thing about
Yep.
retirement withdrawals and the income planning is a lot of the decisions that you make and oftentimes have to make quickly have they can't be reversed. They're irreversible. And so once you make that, you're stuck with it. And there's not a lot of things in life that are like that, but this is one that you don't have a lot of preparation for that kind of thing that you
Yep.
can't undo a decision. And there's a lot when it comes to retirement
Yep.
planning.
Yep. That's a great point. And part of the plans that we put together for our clients and being there for them on an ongoing basis and helping with these decisions, for a lot of people, that benefit is just preventing big mistakes
Yeah.
that can have a disproportionate impact on their probability of success throughout retirement. So
So when you
that's
work
a
with a
really great
financial
point.
planner, do you get your cake? You have your cake and eat it too? I don't know.
There you go.
That's my tie back with cake.
That's a
I'm
good
not
way to
sure.
put it. I love
Not sure if
that.
that's perfect or not.
I love that.
Okay, I interrupted you. You were doing such a fantastic job.
Thank
So
you.
customization is really where you were at, and
Yep.
where, what's one of the bigger benefits of working with a financial advisor or professional is the customization that can come along with it.
Yep. So when we're looking at, let's say for a client like the gentleman that you mentioned, can he retire? Well, what we're going to put into the software that we use to model out his income and his tax plan throughout retirement is everything related to his situation. So everything that he has in investments, conservatively, how we think those might grow, how he might be contributing to them, income sources he might have throughout retirement. So that's the Social Security, the pension, what income need does he have throughout retirement? So he wants $4,000 a month, for example, whatever that number is, we're plugging that into the software as well. Other planned expenditures, like he wants to travel for the first 5 years of retirement, and that might be $10,000 a year. Or he might want to make a big purchase like a motorcycle or fund education for one of his grandkids, and that's all part of the plan as well. We're plugging in all of those aspects, and with conservative assumptions of his life expectancy and investment growth and what inflation might be, we can see what his trajectory looks like long term. If things look good and his portfolio balance is sustaining him out to a conservative life expectancy, we might say, it looks good, you can retire. But then we also have to go back to the lab and we want to stress test that against other potential adjustments that might need to be made later in retirement. So some things we can look at might improve the plan. Like, for example, if doing Roth conversions is a fit, what kind of benefit can we get from doing that? If investment growth is really higher than we're projecting, how could that potentially change his lifestyle in retirement? But then there's also the negatives that we have to consider as well. What if he ends up spending more than the amount that we're projecting? For spouses, married couples, what if one passes away? In what shape is the surviving spouse left? Social Security benefits, if they're potentially reduced in the future. Pension sources, if we look at starting them at one time versus another, how does that impact the plan? And the biggest wrench in things for a lot of people is potential long-term care needs in the future. Of course, nobody knows if they're going to have that need, and if so, to what extent and how much that's going to cost. But we want to model in what if that happens, and will you still be okay in that situation?
As you talk about these things, Jack, they're pretty tangible, the things that you're talking about, and you can model them and you can do the what if scenarios. It doesn't always lend to the behavioral aspects that it's another layer that goes into this. And I'll use an example. It is Roth conversions. You could show
Hmm.
numbers that are, six figures that they would save if they did Roth conversions. People don't respond to that because they cannot get their hands around that it really could make
Hmm.
that big of an impact. That is a behavioral piece that plays into this, even when it's in the positive, or, if it's going to impact them and their children or their heirs.
Hmm.
Like, sometimes those numbers are so significant that people
It
just don't.
seems too good to be true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, and it's so far off
that's true.
potentially in some cases, so a behavioral thing. Or take the concept of long-term care planning. We're not talking about long-term care insurance. The simple act of planning and the potential that you might have to go into a community of some sort, even if it's independent, and then maybe you get to assisted and hopefully not memory care, but people do not wanna have that conversation oftentimes. Again,
Yep.
it goes back to a behavioral piece because they've had a bad experience. They've been responsible for an aunt, uncle, parent, or whatever it might be, and the assumption is, I'm just not going to make a decision, and then my kids will be a part of things as we do. They'll
Right.
help make decisions, but, everything that you described is overwhelming in itself, and the number of pieces that go into it,
Hmm.
leaving out the whole behavioral piece of it. So,
Yep.
just pointing that out as you talk about this is, gosh, that's a lot already, and then
Yeah.
there's other
No, that's
aspects.
that's a great point, and what we see too with a lot of people who are trying to manage things on their own going into retirement, they
Mhm.
look at something like Roth conversions and they may acknowledge, yes, it might be appropriate for me. Yes, I could gain value from that. Then it comes the year to do Roth conversions
Mm.
and they're paying taxes on an extra $50,000, whatever amount of the conversion that they are recommended or decide to do.
Yeah.
That's uncomfortable and they just decide not to do it. And part of that is they need to remember and acknowledge the benefit of this comes over the course of many years, and you're seeing that much later in life. So it's focusing on the long term,
Yeah.
your lifetime tax bill, and not just the tax bill this year, for example. So one of the benefits of the stress testing and the scenario modeling that we're doing is we can show clients there is a dollar value to this in the future. Stick with the plan and you will
Mhm.
see those benefits.
People take a long time to make decisions in general, and unless they have been conditioned throughout their life that they have to be quick decision makers, and so the concept of spending 15,000 or $50,000 on a tax bill can be completely, they can't make that decision.
Yeah.
That's too big for them, and people take a long time. Money is a sensitive topic for people. Big numbers and choosing to do things like that also is another set of roadblocks that people create for themselves, and so having a professional in the corner, uh, can help navigate this behavior that goes along with just big decisions in general. And
Hmm.
so, I know I'm the one that keeps coming back to having a professional, but it is this is the most sloppiest way I could say this, like, it's a real deal to retire and have to live off of your income that you have been, that you've accumulated, the assets you've accumulated. It is a
Hmm.
real deal to do that, and so many big key decisions that are irreversible,
Yeah.
and emotions and behaviors that go along. It's almost like you're getting pinged from
Right.
every perspective as you do this. And so because of that, I do say that oftentimes people don't take advantage of the professionals that are around them and don't seek help. And this is one area, not just because this is what we do, but we can see the impact if you don't make good decisions that I
Hmm.
just try to say over and over, it is a big deal and it is important to have a
Yep.
professional in your corner.
Yep. And for most people too, it's not just a set it and forget it
Yeah.
option. Like the rules of thumb that we looked at, like the 4% rule is it makes it really simple for a lot of people. I'm just going to take this income and, I get my inflation adjustment each year, but I can kind of set it and forget it. But your situation changes throughout the course of your
Yeah.
retirement. I mean, that goes back to I need a one-off distribution because I want to make this purchase or I want to do X or Y or Z. And that's why we're meeting with our clients on an ongoing basis as well. Each year, we're re-updating the plan.
Yeah.
Maybe expenses have increased or we had an unforeseen medical need and that cost X dollars, which was unexpected. And now this portfolio is less than it was expected to be, or this account is. And now we have this additional travel goal, or now we're thinking about buying a cabin. Those things need to be adjusted and reflected in the plan. And oftentimes the outcome can be different
Mhm.
year to year in terms of what our recommendations are to do, but that needs to be kept up to date as you and your situation evolve throughout retirement. And the 4% rule or whatever other rule of thumb doesn't accommodate that. So,
Well, I'm gonna keep us going here. I feel like we could talk on and on and on about a lot of this,
mhm,
but for those that are listening and some of the kind of the lay perspective, let's get into the next question. And it's, kind of, can I? And then it's where? Where does this money come from? And who's going to help me with that? And how does that all work? So, what's the strategy behind that side of things?
mhm. Yep. So there's kind of two questions within the where should my money come from that I see. One is what investment portfolio. So within your investment portfolio, you have more aggressive investments, you have safer investments. Which of those should I be taking from? And then in addition to that, there's also you have different account types
Mhm.
and withdrawals from each of those have different tax implications. So for most people, you might have your 401k from work and it's maybe all pre-tax. There might be some Roth dollars in there. And then some people might have a brokerage investment account outside of that, which is taxed even differently than the pre-tax and the Roth portion. So which of those accounts should I pull from? So first, in terms of portfolios, and it's talked about in another episode this
Okay.
month, but the kind of bucket approach to allocating your investment portfolio. And in general, if we look at your projected income need from your portfolio in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, well, we don't want to be really aggressive with that money because if the market declines between now and when it's needed, we don't want to tap into investments that are down and lock in losses. And that's where that sequence of returns risk that many people hear about, that's where that comes into play. Pulling from investments that are down has a disproportionate impact on your portfolio over time relative to just otherwise taking that same dollar amount from another portfolio. So
And if somebody hasn't heard of the sequence of return, it's something that you can look up yourself, but it's a significant risk
mhm,
that people have in retirement when they are taking from their accounts. In fact, Jack, what I think I'm going to do is make that an offer that's available on our show website because it is such a significant piece to all of this. So
yeah,
I will make that one available. So thanks for bringing that
yeah,
one up.
yeah, that's great. So generally with those, you know, years of income that are coming up sooner, we want to be safer with that money. But with money that we don't need for, let's say, 10 plus years, we can afford to be more aggressive with that. We can put it in aggressive investments like all stocks, for example, which are very volatile and they can go down in excess of 20% in 1 year, for example. But in a given year where you need income, if that's the case, then we're not going to be pulling from those more aggressive investments. And that's why we have those safer investments in your portfolio to pull from. And then the balance between that shorter, safer bucket and the longer term, more aggressive bucket is all dependent on when your income is needed throughout retirement.
Yeah.
If it's not going to be until much later in retirement from your portfolio, then we can be more aggressive with it. And you might see a higher percentage of stocks in your retirement portfolio versus if it's needed sooner, we can't really afford to be as aggressive with that as we otherwise could. So if you need money and you're asking where to take it from, that's kind of the approach that goes back to. If the market is up and your more aggressive investments are up and they've increased in value, we can take some winnings off the table there, acknowledging we don't have to worry about the sequence of returns risk there, and keep the safer bucket intact if the market goes the other way. And if the market did go the other way and your portfolio balance has declined on your more aggressive things, well, we don't want to touch those and we'd pull from the safer bucket instead, some of the more conservative investments. So that's really the portfolio consideration that I see.
Yeah, and you said it, but I just want to revisit it, is you're talking about the buckets being short, medium, and long term, and then the tax approach that layers over the top of those. So each one of those
Yep.
buckets has a tax treatment that
Hmm.
was been set up. And so you're ultimately drawing from 9 buckets. And this is just us spending a handful of minutes on it. And we are going to do a full episode on the concept and how that plays into somebody's retirement withdrawal plan and strategy. Is there anything else that you wanna talk about as it relates to, what we call as distribution, taking money out
Hmm.
of your accounts that you think would be appropriate for everybody here today?
Yeah. So the other consideration on top of what portfolio do I pull it from, as you mentioned, is kind of the tax type. So what
Yeah.
account do I pull from? And there's tons of considerations that go into that. I won't go through all of them today, but some of the main things we're looking at. Well, first of all, not everyone retires until after age 59 and a half. And of course, that's a crucial year. Oftentimes, with, barring another exception, withdrawals from an IRA or a Roth IRA prior to that point can be
Yeah.
subject to a 10% penalty. So for somebody who needs money or is retiring prior to 59 and a half, generally we're not going to touch accounts that would have a penalty on them. And we look to take
Mhm.
from like a brokerage account or another account that won't have that same penalty. And then in addition, we're looking at your lifetime tax bill and the overall tax planning for your retirement income. And the general goal with that is you want to smooth out your income throughout retirement and try to concentrate as much of your income in the lower tax brackets instead of bumping you into much higher tax
Mhm.
brackets in a given year. So, in judging whether we should take it out from an account like an IRA, where every dollar of that is going to be taxable as ordinary income, versus a brokerage account where I'm just getting taxed on the gains, versus potentially a Roth IRA where the entire distribution is tax free, is we're looking at future years of income. If, for example, and as it is for most people, your income is going to increase later in retirement, especially with required minimum distributions that are going to come into play in your 70s for many of your pre-tax accounts, well, we want to do Roth conversions in these years to tactically convert money from the pre-tax or the IRA to tax-free an account like a Roth IRA. And so a general strategy that we use for a lot of people is, if this is a prime year where I can do a big Roth conversion and make a big dent in those future RMDs and get as much money as possible to tax free, well, then I want to keep the taxability of my other income as low as possible. So in those years, we might pull from your brokerage account or even from your bank account, from cash and other non tax advantaged accounts um, that are going to have a low tax bill, and taking money out of them to allow as much room as possible to convert as much as possible to Roth. So that's a big consideration as well.
As you talk about that, one of the things that I brought up, I think I was doing a show with Jeff Foley, and we were talking about when people retire, there's this image of having a retirement table and who is sitting at your table. Who are the professionals at your table? Well, you have a financial person, and the financial person is often quarterbacking a lot of this, but oftentimes you have a tax person. You also have somebody that's paying attention to your health or the Medicare side. And so as you're talking about this, I have my Medicare hat on,
Yep.
knowing that as you push up income or you have low years, while you might want to be doing Roth conversions, I'm making sure, with my Medicare hat on, that we're not pushing into new, the terminology is IRMA. It's an acronym, but making sure that you're not having additional expenses, surcharges that go along with it. So it really does take a lot of people to show up at the table together to make sure that you have a
Yes.
holistic viewpoint on everything.
Yep, that's a great point. Another consideration is not pushing clients, or if we are, that it be tactical and planned above
Yeah.
certain IRMA thresholds where they're now going to have an additional surcharge on their Medicare premiums. But it's also, if we're making a decision at a certain point in the year, being aware of what's coming throughout the rest of the year. Is there, for example, a portfolio change that we want to make in a brokerage account that's going to have a taxable gain at a point
Yeah.
in the future? Or what if there's a planned distribution that they need, for example, to pay for taxes at a certain point later on down the road in this specific year? That all needs to be part of the plan when we make a decision on the here and now, is looking at it not only from this tax year perspective, but also how are things going to change in future years as well, as I mentioned. So we're modeling all of that in for our clients. Another strategy we might use, for example, if they want to make a big purchase, let's say it's $50,000 that they need to buy a new vehicle, instead of taking all of that money out in this year and bumping up a lot of their taxable income this year and reducing the amount they can do in Roth conversions. For example, we could look at, what if we paid off half of it this year?
Mhm.
We do the rest in like a HELOC or another form of debt, but you only have a few months of interest you have to pay on that before we take another distribution next year to pay off the remaining balance, or even spreading that out amongst multiple years. So lots of different strategies that we can
Yeah.
use here, but generally, we're looking at your tax plan for this year. Where is your income coming from? How is it taxed? And then in future years, trying to minimize that throughout retirement to make a decision on what account that comes from. So there's lots in play there.
You really do, as you're making decisions like this, you want to have a second set of eyes on everything you're doing, because it is so complicated. And if you're not working with a professional, then is it your spouse, or is it most of the time people don't open up their financials to their neighbor, but it is to the point where there's so many moving parts that it's good to have a second opinion and good to have a second set of eyes on things. Well,
Absolutely.
we could go through so many more details on this. Is there any really big points that you want to make as we talk about kind of the where is it coming from, as we wrap things up?
Only other thing I'll point out, just in general, Roth funds we're generally leaving until later, since those are tax-free funds. For most people, we are leaving them for the case of an emergency. Like, let's say you have long-term care needs, one spouse goes into a facility, and now you need $120,000 for the year to pay their $10,000 a month rent and cost of being in that facility. Well, in that case, again, it's good to have those tax-free funds set aside to take care of some of those withdrawals before, without pushing
Yeah.
you into a much higher tax bracket. And then there's also considerations like legacy, for example. So if it's really important to you to leave as much as possible to your heirs, well, a pre-tax account, leaving that to your heirs that they're going to have to pay taxes on and be subject to distribution rules like the 10-year rule, stretch RMDs. We might pull from those accounts while you're living and try to leave your brokerage accounts that your heirs get a step up on, and tax-free accounts like Roth IRAs, let those sit and grow. So those are as big as possible to be tax-free to your heirs when they inherit them. So other big considerations there as well.
As you say so many of these things, I ping around on like the clients that I think about, and the behavioral aspects of what they're trying to accomplish is just another key piece of this. And, as you talk about which counts and what you want to do and legacy, that's a something to consider. We have a client that, they want to do things for their kids, but oftentimes legacy falls lower on the priority scale.
Yep.
And for whatever reason that happens, it's fairly consistent. But as you get into the conversations, you find that like a Roth conversion can be a gift to your kids that you don't even maybe look at it like that from the
Right.
perspective until you start having some of these conversations that maybe you don't want to do something today, but you do want to do things for your kids, and passing them a large tax bill is not, you can alter that and by doing a Roth conversion.
Hmm.
And so I
That's a great
bring
point.
back, the point of a lot of what we've talked about today is very technical. It's how much and where is it coming from? And there's a lot of really heavy decision making that has to take place. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again here. Then there's the behavioral aspect of it as well that plays into it. And so, what I've heard you say, Jack, is there's all kinds of different strategies that go into taking a withdrawal. There's all kinds of different behaviors that go into that we have to create custom plans for, having be willing to move with as those behaviors pop up and those needs pop up. It's not a one size fits all. It is complicated. Working with a professional or having a second opinion is a really key piece of this along the way. And so I feel like this is one of the more technical, complicated conversations. The good news is we are going to continue the conversation in greater depth over the next two episodes so that we can get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty, because we could keep going. Is there anything else that you want to share, or a real life story or anything like that as we close out today? And I'm putting you on the spot. So if the answer is no, we still have two more episodes to go through things as
Yeah.
well.
Nothing else I want to share. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Well, I certainly appreciate you being here. And as everybody who is listening, I hope you can tell how bright Jack is and how much expertise he brings along the way to our clients and even to our listeners. And when he speaks, he clearly knows what he's talking about. As I had mentioned, we like to do a takeaway from, something that we can give you that's available to you after each episode. And because Jack brought it up, and I think it's completely appropriate for this series, we're going to do the sequence of return chart that's available. It gives you more detail on what that means, but the risk that goes along if you're withdrawing from your accounts at the wrong time. So we'll make that available as part of our website, and that's paladinfinancialtalk.com that you can get this download. But with that, if you're sitting here and you've listened to the conversation today and you think, oh my goodness, this is me, or I need a second opinion, go out to Paladin Financial Talk, or even go to our main website at paladinfinancial.com and request a 15-minute, no obligation conversation with us to help get clarity around the conversation we've had today. You can choose Jeff and Jack as team members that you'd like to meet with. You can choose myself. We have a whole gosh, are we at 6 advisors now? I think we're at 6 advisors
I
that you
think
can
so.
choose to
Yep.
work with. And so go out, research our team, look at who we are, and we'd love to give you that 15-minute no obligation conversation. Again, you can visit us at paladinfinancial.com or visit our show page at paladinfinancialtalk.com. Call us at 651-842-8406. Follow along on social media. You can find all of our sites when you visit our website, but we're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and more. So, Jack, thank you for visiting today. I love your perspective. I love how much detail that you can give to each of our conversation. And then for all of you that listen today, we'll see you on the next episode.